Yep. So how's that?
Yeah.
I got a tendency to want to be really close to it, like.
It's a microphone. It's not your love. I'll put it down.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Remind podcast. I'm Dr. Ash and I'm joined by my co host Dave Masterton. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that was actually raised in my group program, Rise and Thrive. And one of the questions we were asked is there such thing as healthy chaos? And Dave and I got chatting about this and we thought, hey, let's do a whole entire episode on it because there is some really interesting neuroscience that becomes relevant here. And behaviorally, we really start to see how this plays out in our lives. So, Dave, you had an interesting story about this. What was your background in understanding this?
Yeah, well, it all came from sort of trying to understand ADHD. And I came across this book called The Hunter in a Farmer's World. And I think overall, the hunter part of it is the kind of traits that you need to be a successful hunter. You need to be quick, agile, hyper focused on your prey, without necessarily thinking too far into the future when you're in the hunting process, which you can draw a lot of similarities between hunting and ADHD versus the farmer, which needs to be very well strategic, patient, has the ability to plan, as opposed to, let's just say, for argument's sake, you're a hunter and you're chasing after a pig. And you're chasing, and you need the ability to make split-second decisions. And you see the pig run off into the corner, maybe into somewhere where you can't get to, and suddenly you see a deer running the other way. You need to make split-second decisions or be impulsive. We'll call it impulsive. And that sort of really resonated with me because, and I was reading it because I was trying to understand a bit more about my boy William. And as I was reading it, I'm reading myself as well. I'm like, ooh. And the interesting thing that it had in the book, it referenced, is it
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to cheat and have a look. But let's just say on the bottom, it says physiological needs, like the stuff, air, water, food, shelter, sleeping, clothing, all of that. Safety needs, you need your own security, employment, resources, health, property. Then you need love and belonging, which is like friendship, intimacy, all of that. Esteem, which is like respect, self-respect, status, recognition. Then right at the top is self-actualization, which is the desire to become the most you can be, like to be your best version.
Yeah, to fulfill the fullness of your potential.
That's it. Now, the author of this book, and I'll link I'll put what the name of the book is and everything in the comments below. But he said that there's one missing step in all of that, which is the need to feel alive, which I thought was really quite cool. And so he then referenced, now you're going to need to help me here because I'm no scientist. He referenced a part of the brain, the thalamus, is it? Thalamus. That basically, when it's really open, it allows a lot of sensations to be made aware of the brain, or it allows you to sort of really be able to absorb everything in your environment. When it's very closed, there's only a very little that gets through. And when you have very little getting through, you have to create a lot of stimulus to try and be able to feel, I want to say regulated, but I'm not sure regulated is the right word, but to kind of feel okay. And so big risk takers generally will have a smaller thalamus. So not much gets through. So they have to create it. Where people that have it really large, they could sit and stare at a colour and just be absolutely amazed and soak everything in. And so from an ADHD point of view, that's why he also, and I don't know if I'm paraphrasing the book or whether it's just my own thinking here, but that's why stimulus or stimulants work as a cure to calm down someone who's hyperactive all the time, because you're actually adding more stimulus without them having to create it, which actually settles them. It feels that need to feel alive. So having the right amount of chaos, especially in the neurodivergent with ADHD, 100%. And from someone who's definitely in that camp, like I can get bored with being bored.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's different to being still and mindful, which we'll talk about in episodes later. But you need that sense of, it's hard to describe. It's hard to describe.
It's really interesting. I haven't read the book, but I'm really keen to read it. But it reminds me of something that I learned at a trauma conference a couple of years ago. And this was one of the defining moments where so much made sense for me, not only in my own life, but in what I'd observed in clients. And what they had shown was there was this neuroscience research that showed that there's a network in the brain called the default mode network. And the default mode network is made up of a whole bunch of anatomical structures. But interestingly, like when I got into neuroscience, 15 years ago, no, not 15 years ago, I don't know, however many years ago it was a lot of years ago, there was a really big focus on anatomical neuroscience. And so what that means is that there was this obsession with saying this structure is responsible for this and this structure does that. And where neuroscience has gone more recently is that actually there's less of a focus on structures and more of a focus on networks. Because what they're saying is that actually it's not so much the structure that's important, but it's the way this series of structures actually interacts and engages with each other that determines our function and output. And so this, a lot of this conference was really focused on that. A lot of neuroscience focused on networks. And something I found really amazing was when they were talking about the default mode network is now being understood and referenced as our sense of self. It's very, very important in perceiving and understanding and relating and sensing ourself. So it probably goes without saying that there's a lot of sensory input, which is sort of lining up with what you're saying as well. But what was accidentally found was that they showed that people who had experienced early life trauma had a default mode network at rest that was completely silent, like no activity. And then when those people were exposed to a threatening stimulus, their default mode network lit up like a Christmas tree. And at the time, they were struggling to explain these findings, going, it just doesn't make sense. Why is the default mode network or the sense of self, we're talking about the feeling alive thing, why is that sense of self network silent when there's no threat?
And so what you're sort of saying is when it's silent, it's actually unnerving. It's like
Yes, because
it's like someone's turned all the lights off or whatever it is. It's not, we're not talking about in the sense like you're calm and mindful.
no,
It's almost like it's the opposite. When this
it's
thing's
almost like
turned,
you don't exist anymore, like you are unalive.
yeah, within yourself, like
Yeah.
you've maybe we'll call it disconnected, maybe.
Yes, massively.
Yeah.
So disconnection, dissociation, those kinds of words. So the huge part of this was there was actually a researcher, part of the research group, and I hope that I'm telling this story correctly. This is based off my memory of hearing
From
this talk.
15 years ago, yeah.
No, this was only a couple of years ago at the conference. So there was someone in the research team who, as a child, had experienced trauma and used to shoplift. And they said, you know what? That actually makes a lot of sense to me because when I used to shoplift, because it was one of the only times I felt alive, like the risk of it, taking risks gave me this hit and I felt alive. And so what they actually started showing was that people who had really healthy default mode network, who weren't ADHD, who didn't experience early life trauma, whose brain was not wired to be hyper vigilant and be always detecting threat, then their default mode network, if they had a healthy brain, was lit up at rest in sense of safety. So they could feel alive and present even when there was no threat or no stress. So those people would likely have highly organized lives, likely be quite productive, because their default mode network enables that. Whereas in these other people who had brains more wired for threat detection and for survival and to function well under threat, their default mode lights up, but that's also what drives that risk-taking behavior. So
And
then,
so when it's blanked out, let's just
yeah,
say when it's blanked out, you're on a much higher level of alert or readiness, almost an uneasy sort of like dancing on a knife edge type thing.
yeah, and it's that mental sharpness. You know, that mental
Right.
sharpness that can just
Yeah.
come over you, and it's like, bing. If you've ever seen the
Mm.
movie Limitless,
Yeah.
where he
Bradley
takes the
Cooper. Yeah.
pills and it
Mm.
like activates his brain. That's what I imagine my brain doing sometimes when I'm like, I feel it just comes online and all of a sudden I have this mental sharpness that the rest of the time I just feel like I'm in a little bit of a mental fog.
Mm.
So that's what's kind of at play there. And the other part of this was the dopamine. So dopamine is released in dopamine, obviously really relevant to ADHD.
Mm.
But in those same people,
Now,
dopamine.
just to remind everybody, dopamine's the happiness
Oh,
or
dopamine's like our reward hormone.
the reward hormone.
Yeah. So
Oxytocin's the happiness.
oxytocin's presence and connection.
Yeah.
Cortisol is stress,
Okay.
stress or threat. So in that same group of people where their default mode network came online in the presence of risk taking and threat, also during risk taking and threat is cortisol. And so what they were finding is that their brains were conditioned to release dopamine in response to stress hormones. And so behaviorally,
Right.
how does that play out? Well, in relationships, we probably take on people who are like projects, who are not stable, who are not predictable, but who we're trying to fix or change or work on. We will probably leave things to the last minute, because when we leave things to the last minute and all of a sudden the threat level gets high enough, bing, our brain comes online.
Procrastination's a big one for me. Oh,
Yeah.
I hear you on that one.
So behaviorally, we'll say yes to everything. We'll overload
Mm.
our plate so much because when we're under the pressure of having such an overloaded plate, then we can magically get things done. So it's like the pressure and stresses of life and risk-taking behaviors, really big in addictions, really big in all kinds of facets of life. That's what makes that default mode network come online and
Mm.
makes us feel alive.
And I suppose the whole thing about this episode is there a healthy amount of chaos? And I mean, let's just take that whole thing and look at it and sort of go, well, the reason why we're talking about it is because generally chaos is deemed to be bad.
Yeah.
It's deemed to be out of order, rushed, panicked, high pressure. And so, when we're, I suppose, trying to chase order, comfort, certainty, and a lot of the stuff that you and I talk about over the past, I think we're like up to episode 33 now, is what we're really trying to do is talk to people about being in a regulated state, in a mindful state, in understanding self, in connecting with the self. You got to slow things down, being present. But there's always this thing about, well, we are a spiritual entity living a human existence.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be a little bit of this sense of feeling alive. Now, whether you want to call that drama, whether you want to call that chaos,
Yeah.
excitement, stress, I mean, excitement is a form of stress. It's just a positive one that people would be very happy to chase all day. And I believe that's the difference between stress and distress. Like distress is like the negative side of stress.
Well,
Like,
it's perception really, but it's perception that drives a physiological response in the body. But even that, it comes down to, excitement. Another thing people with ADHD will often relate to is shiny light, like shiny object syndrome. Kind of going, oh that, oh I want to do that, oh that, oh that,
yeah,
oh that, and they're constantly looking for the exciting, shiny new stimulus. And that's part of this as well, right? Because that is just a different way of creating chaos, which allows us to feel alive. So, I mean, healthy chaos is totally paradoxical. Like,
yes,
it seems as though those two words don't belong together,
mm-hmm.
but there are so many ways in which a level of unpredictability and disorder can be super helpful. Like, when this is why people whose brains are wired this way are so multi-passionate and talented and often super creative, super innovative. Their capacity to problem solve and see patterns, like pattern recognition in things, is amazing. So the benefit of healthy chaos is channeling that degree of lack of order and chaos into something that is a healthy channel. So looking for ways you can bring in creativity into your life and innovation and problem solving that is in a healthy way, as opposed to recruiting a project partner or boyfriend or girlfriend and trying to, problem solve them.
Well, look, let's think about what you've just said there, which is about
Yeah.
bringing the healthy chaos in. Let's have some examples, right? So the first thing that comes into my mind is spontaneity. Because it's sort of like, okay, you don't have to be necessarily irresponsible. Yes, if you take spontaneity to a nth degree, you will find the limits of responsibility and going to irresponsibility. We're not talking about that. What we're saying is being spontaneous allows you to sort of bring a certain excitement and into your life, whether it be with someone else or for yourself, so long as you're being responsible with everything else, it doesn't impact other things. Another thing you were sort of saying is creativity. Well, it's sort of like, again, when you add a level of spontaneity into your creativity, you just go and do it. You don't have to worry about what am I going to paint. Just slap colours on the canvas.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Let it evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
And
the creative breakthrough, right?
yeah.
And
Or
so it's breaking away from the rules and the structures and the rigid routines and all those kinds of things. But even that in itself is paradoxical, because our nervous system is driven by certainty. We love certainty, but yet we also crave the capacity to break free and have creativity and innovation and problem solving and
yeah.
variety. And
You
this is, I think about this in my own life, right? As a practitioner and doing what I do now, I came from a academic world where, as a scientist, I had all kinds of capacity to be creative and innovative and problem solve and all this kind of stuff. And I always said to people, because in academia and in science, there's a real push to be an expert in one little thing. So it's like you funnel down and you become such an expert on just that one tiny little thing. And there are scientists who have spent their entire careers, 40 plus years researching the same thing. And I looked at that and I was like, oh, no, I couldn't think of anything
yeah.
worse. And so I was like, again, that's where I got my shiny object. I'd go, oh, I want to do that. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I want to learn more about that. But now, as a practitioner, if you think about creativity, innovation, problem solving, creative breakthroughs, this is exactly what my work is. Every single client I have has these unique issues in their nervous system. They have all these different inputs or different experiences that they've had in their lives and intergenerational stuff and all these different things that come into it. And my brain gets such a healthy kick of chaos out of this that I get to just let it run. and I will see patterns in things that no one else will see. I will have little breakthroughs in my creative thinking or innovative thinking and come up with things on the spot. My sessions are not routine. They're not rigid. People will say to me, okay, but what do you do? How do you do it? I'm like, I don't know. You just got to trust me. It happens. That's my magic. I'm trained in all these different modalities, but I don't go in with a rigid plan of saying, today, this is what we're going to do, because it brings a box and puts it around the potential of that creative outlet and the breakthrough that can come of that.
The limitations.
The limitation, exactly.
And it's like you raise an interesting point, because what is freedom? And so when you think about being free, it's for me, it's the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want, without the fear of being hurt. And, as a good person, you're not doing it to take away from anyone. You're just doing it for yourself. So then you overlay, well, how does that work? Does that work in a level of order? Or can we replace chaos with freedom?
Yeah.
The word chaos.
But it reminds me of that meme, and it's like, I can't remember it exactly, but it's something along the lines of, when you're a kid, you can't wait to be a grown up because no one can tell you not to eat the donut.
You're not going to tell me what to do.
But then when you're a grown up
breakfast.
and you don't have someone to tell you not to eat the donuts, you really need someone to tell you not to eat the donuts. And it's like we crave this level of freedom. This is why so many people whose brain is wired in this way traditional employment is not a good fit for them. And so quite often, many of these people will go and become entrepreneurs because the journey of entrepreneurship is innovation, creativity, stress, chaos,
just
all
sort
the
of
things.
problem solving, being agile.
Yeah,
it's hunting over farming. Let's put it that
but
way.
there is a level of farming that's required in
Absolutely.
that. There's a level of, and that's where we need to bring some order to that disorder and that
100%.
healthy chaos.
100%. Because again, when we're looking at all of this, when you look at the outlying edges of both of these, yes, they can be problematic. But when you have a nice mix of both, or you might domicile a little bit more in one than the other, it's not really going to be an issue.
Yeah.
And when we talk about this, and we've talked about it as people being neurodivergent and having a diagnosis of, say, autism or ADHD, that doesn't exclude other people having these traits.
Absolutely.
And
a diagnosis isn't the determining factor.
No.
Have a look at the behavioral outcomes. If you can relate to any of the behaviors we've spoken about, regardless of a diagnosis, we're not telling you to go out and get diagnosed,
No.
but we're giving you some things to think about in terms of, if these are the behaviors that you're engaging in from a brain wiring perspective, this could be driving it. And the thing that you've got to understand, even with diagnostic labels, those labels are just a label given to the observation of a set of behaviors. There is no such thing as, there's no ADHD cell. There's no, there is a cancer cell. We can clearly we can clearly see the pathology of that. There are changes in the ADHD brain, or in the brain that fits the model of ADHD, but behaviorally, whether or not you have the label, you can still have those changes clinically. You can still have those changes behaviorally. And some people will have some of these things and not all of them. And some people will or won't fit the diagnostic criteria. That actually doesn't matter. If we're fixating on the label, we're missing the point. So,
because there could be times where I just don't want to be in a large group of people. It doesn't mean I'm agoraphobic.
yeah.
But it might not. Sometimes I'll be that way. Sometimes I won't. You can sort of flux in and out of these things based on other things. So, yeah, as you said, we're not going to get caught up.
Well, it's also really invalidating. For some reason, this popped into my head this morning when I got out of the shower, and I was thinking about how ridiculous it is when, my son had specialists say, "Oh, he's not autistic, because he makes eye contact." Okay. Like, uh, okay. So that's the defining factor. And I see this. It can be so invalidating when people have these experiences where so many of the behaviors point towards a certain
Mm,
label, but then they don't get the label and they feel as though they've been invalidated. Um, I think the main thing to think about is that if the behaviors are happening, regardless of whether some professional gives you a label or not, if the behaviors are being experienced, well, then it's because your brain is producing those behaviors. So then
mm,
let's ask the question, well, why is your brain producing those behaviors? And if you relate to that creating chaos in your life and unconsciously, this is not something that we wake up and go, gee, how could I just create the most chaotic life possible today? How could I make my life as hard as possible? No one does that.
no,
But yet,
or
by the
even
end of the
even at the
day,
bar, gee, everything seems quite quiet around here. Here, hold my beer.
yeah, exactly. But then without fail, we could get to the end of the day or get to the end of the week or the end of the month or the end of the year and look at the chaos that we've manifested in that year.
Hmm.
So it's happening regardless of our intention. So then we ask the question, well, okay, well, what can we do about it? And I think that the tricky thing is if we are wired for our default mode network to only come alive in stress, in chaos, in pressure, well, that's our baseline. And if our baseline through maladaptive plasticity, so what that means is there's been some negative environmental experiences where our brain has had to adapt in order to survive those environments. That's
Hmm.
called maladaptive neuroplasticity. So, if my brain has been altered through maladaptive neuroplasticity, which can even happen in utero before we're even born, well, the beautiful thing is that we know that there's this thing called adaptive plasticity. We know that through certain exposures to certain stimuli, we can change the way that our brain functions. And this is specifically what we're doing in the group program. Things like learning how to connect with others. And I don't mean just how to hang out with people, I mean like walls down, fully exposed, fully raw, fully vulnerable, and to feel safe being held.
Hmm.
That is a way to activate those networks. How can we experience our sense of self and feel alive through experiencing connection with others, connection with self?
Well, I guess it's the ability to go in and out of both. We can feel that sort of sense of peace and self and, quietness and be okay with that, but also then go from there and allow ourselves to find the excitement and passion and spontaneity in life.
Yes.
Because I guess when what we're talking about now, if you were to re-listen to the whole episode and change the title to something else along the lines of how you create chaos to be able to survive,
To
right?
experience yourself, yeah.
Or even like I'm seeing it at the moment where because when you can create chaos and drama, it in my mind can also be a symptom of the fact that you're not willing to go internally. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
distract yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the behaviors and the stuff we're talking about can be confused with that type of behavior. One is it's quite okay and it's quite necessary to feel alive versus constantly doing it as a way to not look at your inner trauma or inner
Yeah.
wounds. And so, for example, if you get to a place where things are becoming certain, you are becoming a bit more relaxed, and then you start to find stuff bubbling up within you that you're just not ready to release for one reason or another, whether it be fear or whatever it is, then suddenly you can manufacture drama, you can manufacture chaos
Mm-hmm.
to keep yourself running.
Yeah. Keeps you busy
And
and it distracts you from the real issue.
and if you keep on running, you're outrunning whatever's wanting to come up to be purged and released.
Yeah.
So I guess you then ask the question, okay, well, what's the difference between knowing healthy chaos versus the unhealthy chaos,
Yeah.
which is my long-winded way to getting to that.
Well, my answer to that is the chaos life-giving or is it life-taking? And if it's life-taking, that means it's draining, it's detrimental to relationships, it's detrimental to your health, it's detrimental to your finances. And if that chaos is life-taking, well, then that's probably when it's time to look at healthier ways to get those needs met. Now, what does life-giving chaos look like?
Yes.
Well, like the examples that we gave before, life-giving chaos is where there's contribution, where there's growth, where there's learning, where there is using your creativity and innovation to actually contribute to something in a healthy way. It might be for financial gain, it might be for the betterment of society. And that brings in this discussion around human needs again. So you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I use a different model of human needs. That's Maslow's is super relevant, but the other model that I use is certainty, variety, significance and connection, and then growth and contribution. Pardon me. Growth and contribution kind of come about once those first ones are met. And when we're talking about this healthy chaos, the life-giving chaos, well, how can we get our variety needs met in a different way, in a healthy way? Because let's talk about someone who, this risk-taking behavior. If that's promiscuity and they're going out and picking up different sexual partners all the time, well, guess what? There's certainty because if they go out, they know they can pick up. There's variety because there's different partners all the time. There's significance again because they can hunt and gather that attention. And there's connection because there is undoubtedly connection when
Physical.
there is physical connection, right? But no one would argue that that's a healthy way of getting chaos or getting that need met. So if then it's very effective. It's very effective at getting those needs met. But it's life-taking. So what could be some healthier ways to get those needs met? Well, gosh, imagine going to the supermarket. I have a friend who does this, goes to the supermarket, goes to the international food aisle, and every week buys something different that they haven't tried before. Well, that's an interesting way of getting variety needs met. One may argue nowhere near as fun, but
Oh, look, unless you're someone who doesn't like coriander and you go, I'm going to try coriander for the first time. And
yeah, but then think about how could we get our other needs met? How could we get our needs of certainty met? How could we get our needs of significance and connection met? I mean, in life-giving ways, if your work isn't fulfilling, then what would make it fulfilling? The work that I do, the example that I gave before, the work that I do you think that I get a lot of certainty out of my work?
well, you as an entrepreneur or let's say a solo practitioner, some days yes, some days no. So I'm going to say certainty, not really.
Wow. See, I see a lot of certainty in my work.
Okay.
I see so much certainty because I have really refined my ways of working with people. I know that I can get results if I can get them on board. I know that I've got money coming in. I know that I've got certainty in my approaches. I know when I'm having conversations with people what I'm looking for. I've got so much certainty in what I do that I feel. And then variety. No two clients are the same at all. Significance. I feel really significant when I have been able to contribute to someone's transformation. I get huge significance out of that. I have connection because I develop connection and relationship with the people that I'm working with. So for me to channel that into what I get to spend every day doing has been hugely healthy for me. So my life is still busy and full of chaos, but it's healthy, life-giving chaos. And I've had to practice stillness, which I think we might talk about maybe in our next episode.
Yeah, I think so. Because I want to take a little bit of a different take on, and we'll go back to your example of what unhealthy chaos might be, and we'll say going out with the view of, going home with someone brand new, or you've got, a Rolodex of people that you hook up with, something like that.
Tinder. It's basically Tinder, the
There you
app
go. The app.
that is built off unhealthy chaos.
And so you sort of look at that and say, okay, so what makes it unhealthy? Well, we've sort of said what you're looking for is you're trying to fulfill needs, which is a healthy thing. Fulfilling needs is a healthy thing, but doing it in an unhealthy way. And so, how do you know you're doing it in an unhealthy way? Because we've taken a fairly, well, I suppose, specific topic, which most people look at and go, it's not healthy. But let's just say you're dancing in the grey area, and you wake up in the morning, you don't want chaos, but for some reason you've just generated a whole heap of chaos all day.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not you. It's the fact that that person did that, and that person said that, and this thing happened the wrong way, and you're not really sort of sensing it's a you issue.
Yeah.
And so when you look at these things and you sort of go, okay, well, how do I know without gaslighting myself, I'm trying to find healthy chaos, or we'll call it variety, versus I'm creating it? Well, in my experience and from what I'm seeing in other people, it's the ability to be still and be completely okay in the stillness is a very, very big green flag to say you can be in one camp or the other, and you are actually able to choose in a healthy way which one you need to be. So if your body's craving some excitement, you can bring that excitement in a regulated and healthy way.
Yeah.
If your body needs to be still, you can generate that and get that in a healthy way. So if you're finding that you cannot be still because all these bad thoughts start coming in, you don't like the environment that's in your head in the stillness.
Or even if you just feel unalive, you feel empty, you feel disconnected, you feel dissociated. That's
Beautiful.
a huge deterrent to wanting to
Beautiful.
be still. That's scary as heck.
So that gives you an idea of if you're doing it, we'll go quote unquote the right way. Am I able to chase healthy variety, or am I just chasing unhealthy chaos? I think that in itself is a way, because when you go back to your example, you talk about the different needs. A lot of those times those needs are being brought up because there's other work that needs to be done, other limiting beliefs that have been being generated, other wounds that need to be released.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you can go and try coriander for the first time, or you can, go on, just plan an adventure with your best friend. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that you do is you decide to meet at a place, and you don't decide anything else except for the length of time you're going to hang out, with the idea of doing something that you've never done before.
Yeah. Just having new experiences. I noticed I went to a conference recently and I laughed at myself because I went into the first time I went to the bathroom at the conference center, I used one particular cubicle, and then every single time that I went to the toilet after that, I used the same cubicle, and it's completely unconscious. It's not like I went, "Ooh, I'm going to have the same cubicle." But there is an unconscious level of I got a dopamine hit out of that because it was predictable. And if you have grown up with chaos being predictable, well, then you're going to reproduce chaos because it's predictable and you get dopamine out of it. So when you were saying
chaos
before
being
about,
predictable.
Yeah, isn't it? It's so bizarre. So if you are sitting there and it's what Dave was saying before about, and it's everyone else, not you, you haven't created the chaos and you're really sitting in that, I would challenge you to actually look back over your life and go, okay, if you're someone who thinks that everyone uses you and all your friends use you, well, look back and try and find a single friend who didn't use you, because chances are you have manufactured that situation by choosing friends who use you and allowing them to behave in that way. And there's a repetition of the same patterns throughout our life. When I look back over my relationships, This was only a new revelation and could probably be a whole episode on its own. But I observed a dysfunctional driver of trying to create chaos in my life when my husband was working away. And the whole time he was away, I still felt, I missed him. I couldn't wait for him to come home. And 24 hours before he was due to come home, I felt this discomfort in my body, and I just started picking, and I just wanted to start a fight. I wanted to start an argument. And I was like, what is this? And I could have very easily found all of the reasons and all of the justifications in the things that he was doing, or like I could have validated why I was feeling what I was feeling. But when I sat with it and I looked back over the patterns of my behavior, I'm going, hang on a minute. Every boyfriend I've ever had who went away and then came home, this was a pattern. My first husband was in the army, and when he would come home, I would feel this same feeling in my body and we would have an argument. And so I
Wow.
started thinking, why am I manifesting this chaos around the scenario of him coming home? And when I really sat with it, it was partly because I missed him and I really wanted him to be as excited to see me as I was to see him. And a way for me to control the outcome of that, or to predict accurately that he wouldn't, is if I started a fight, because then I could control that he wouldn't be excited to see me because
You're manufacturing surety.
I manufactured the predictability of it. And so that's a way for me to create pressure and stress and tension and chaos in a relationship that's an unhealthy pattern of behavior. But I could very easily go through the rest of my life, and if it wasn't him, it might be someone else. But there's nothing that they could have done that would have changed the behavior in me. So I think it's a really, self-awareness around this stuff is so valuable. Where are you
Yeah.
creating chaos in your life? Where are you nitpicking? Where are you
Mm.
taking on too much? Where are you saying yes to too much?
Or where yeah, and this is again subconsciously, you're only recording, you're only remembering those events that reaffirm your narrative, which
Yeah,
is everyone else is the chaos, not me.
yeah,
But again,
absolutely.
through all the other work that you'd be doing, this was to come out. But I think it's been a pretty awesome episode around sort of healthy variety, and we'll call it, healthy chaos,
Yeah,
versus like the negative. And I
yeah,
love what you said. Is it life giving or is it life taking?
yeah,
Well, look, if you don't know, because you're sort of sitting there going, I'm really not sure if it's either or, just think to yourself, can you sit comfortably in peace? Because that's a really, really big thing.
yeah. And look, literally grab a pen and paper right now and sit down and start writing, what are some really healthy ways that I could get excitement in my life? Because as Dave mentioned, excitement is a healthy form of stress, and physiologically you'll have a similar reaction. So where can you get healthy levels of excitement in your life that are life-giving?
Or even
Is it,
passion.
yeah,
Like
passion.
that's a massive one. Like
Yeah,
passion, to me, is a level of excitement, but with a little bit more to it. It's like
yeah.
there's a little bit more drive. There's a little bit more in it. So absolutely. Well, great
Good chat,
episode,
Dave.
and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah, you
Thank you,
will.
everyone. Catch you
See
later.
ya.
Bye bye.
Bye.